Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. It started like any other road trip. My wife, Karen, and I were headed to the mountains for a weekend getaway. A chance to reconnect, so I thought. We'd been married for 10 years, 10 long years of what I thought was a good marriage. Maybe a little stale, but what marriage isn't after a decade? We had our routines, our comfort zones. She'd get home late from work, I'd be there, waiting with dinner, the TV on in the background, both of us too tired to talk about much other than the kids or the bills. But this trip was supposed to be different. It was meant to pull us back together. The drive was uneventful at first. Rolling hills and the sound of tires humming on the highway, the kind of peaceful quiet you get when you're not in a rush to be anywhere. Karen sat beside me, scrolling through her phone, her face occasionally illuminated by the screen. I didn't think much of it at the time, just another moment of silence between us, the kind that had become all too normal. About 2 hours into the drive, she said she needed a bathroom break. "There's a Wawa at the next exit," she mentioned casually, like she'd already been planning the stop. I pulled off the highway, the gas station coming into view. She hopped out, leaving her phone on the seat. I didn't even glance at it right away, I was too busy checking directions on my own. But then her phone lit up. I couldn't help but look, just a reflex more than anything else. It was a message. One of those short, innocent-looking texts at first glance, but the wording caught my attention. "Can't wait to see you tonight, babe." The word "babe" hit me like a slap across the face. My stomach tightened. I wasn't the paranoid type, but something about that message made me feel cold inside. I couldn't help myself. I picked up her phone and unlocked it. We didn't have secrets, or so I thought, so I knew her passcode. What I saw next was worse than I could have imagined. A thread of messages, dozens of them, all from the same number. A Virginia area code. I scrolled through the texts quickly, my eyes darting over phrases like, "Last night was amazing," and, "I miss you already." Each message dug a little deeper into me, like twisting a knife. They'd been meeting for months, and from what I could gather, he wasn't just some casual fling. He was someone she saw regularly, during her work trips. Trips I never questioned because why would I? I trusted her. I don't remember how long I stared at that screen, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands shaking slightly. Then I heard the automatic doors of the Wawa slide open, and Karen came out. I quickly put her phone back down on the seat, but she must have seen something in my face, something was off. Her pace quickened, turning into a near sprint as she came back to the car. I barely had time to process it when she yanked the door open, snatched her phone from the seat, and shot me a look that wasn't anger, but fear. "What's wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, as if I hadn't just uncovered her betrayal. "Nothing," she replied too quickly, her tone defensive. "I left my wallet inside. Be right back." She practically ran back into the store, phone clutched tight in her hand. I sat there, frozen, my mind racing in 1,000 directions. I wanted to scream at her, demand answers right then and there. But I didn't. Something in me told me to wait. It wasn't the right time to confront her, not in the middle of a road trip, not when we were hours from home and on our way to a secluded cabin. The worst part was, she didn't know that I knew. She thought she was in control, thought she was smart enough to hide this affair from me. That was my first mistake, letting her believe it. I should have confronted her then, in that parking lot, made a scene if I had to. But I didn't. I kept it to myself. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to see how far she would take it, how many lies she could tell before she crumbled under the weight of them. Or maybe it was the disbelief, the shock that someone I loved, someone I'd built a life with, could do this to me. To us. When she came back to the car, she was all smiles again, as if nothing had happened. "Ready to go?" she asked, sliding into the passenger seat, phone now securely in her purse. I forced a smile, nodded, and pulled back onto the highway. The rest of the drive was a blur. She talked, but I didn't really hear her. My mind was too busy replaying the texts, imagining all the times she must have been with him when I thought she was at work. I wondered who he was, this guy who'd taken her from me. Was he younger? Better looking? Did he make her feel something I couldn't anymore? By the time we reached the cabin, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. No, I was going to gather everything, every text, every lie, every piece of evidence I could get my hands on. And when I was ready, I'd destroy her life the way she had destroyed mine. But I wasn't going to rush it. Revenge is best served cold, after all. That night, lying beside her in bed, I couldn't sleep. She had no idea that the man lying next to her knew everything. That he was plotting, calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I stared at the ceiling, listening to her soft breathing, wondering how long this had been going on. Did she ever love me? Or had it all been a lie from the start? The next morning, she was up early, already texting on her phone. Probably telling him how excited she was to see him again, how perfect their little affair was. But I kept my face neutral, played the role of the clueless husband for one more day. I knew I wouldn't have to play it much longer. We spent the rest of the weekend hiking and sightseeing. She laughed and joked, acting like the perfect wife. But every time she smiled at me, all I could see was the betrayal. I pretended to go along with it, knowing full well what was coming. The drive home was quieter. Karen seemed lost in her own world, texting again, probably making plans to see him once we got back. I didn't care anymore. Let her have her little affair. Soon enough, I would take everything from her, her home, her money, her perfect little life. As we pulled into the driveway, I glanced at her one last time before stepping out of the car. She had no idea that her world was about to crumble. And I wasn't going to give her any warning. As the days passed after that tense weekend, I kept my silence. Karen went about her life, completely unaware that I knew everything. She would leave for work each morning, kiss me goodbye as if nothing was wrong, and I'd watch her walk out the door, phone clutched tightly in her hand like a lifeline. The disgust I felt when I looked at her was almost unbearable, but I held it in. I couldn't blow my cover. Not yet. I spent my nights lying awake, thinking through every detail, every possible move. I became obsessed with finding out exactly how long this affair had been going on. If I was going to take her down, I needed the full picture. The first thing I did was start checking her phone bill. Karen wasn't careful, clearly overconfident that I would never suspect her. But she didn't know me as well as she thought. I found the same Virginia area code scattered all over the bill, a number she called almost daily. Sometimes for just a few minutes, sometimes for hours. I didn't know who this man was yet, but I would soon enough. I ran the number through a reverse phone lookup service. It came back as a VoIP number, meaning it was likely some burner account, something to keep him anonymous. Smart. He didn't want to leave a trail. But I wasn't worried. If Karen thought she could hide him from me, she was wrong. All I needed was more time. One night, while she was asleep, I took her phone. My hands trembled as I unlocked it, scrolling through her texts. Most of the messages between them were deleted, but she hadn't been thorough. There were still a few remnants, enough to confirm that the guy was more than just some fling. He was someone she was emotionally involved with. I miss you, one message read. Another said, I can't wait to feel your arms around me again. I felt sick reading it. I wondered how long she'd been lying to my face, coming home to me after being with him, pretending everything was normal. But this wasn't the time for self-pity. I took screenshots of everything, forwarded them to myself, then carefully placed her phone back where I found it. The next step was gathering more evidence, but I didn't want to alert her by acting suspicious. I kept playing the role of the oblivious husband, nodding along when she talked about work or her stressful day. I even pretended to be interested when she mentioned another business trip coming up soon. In reality, I was waiting for my moment. When that trip finally came, it was like a gift. Karen was leaving for Orlando, supposedly for a conference. But I knew better. I'd found emails between her and her lover, his name was Scott, detailing the hotel they would meet at, plans for dinner, and even suggestions for getting away from the conference to be together. I wasn't going to let her have this weekend. Not without consequences. The day she left, I watched her pack, her movements a little too eager, like she couldn't wait to get out of the house. "I'll be back Sunday night," she said casually, leaning down to kiss me. I let her, feeling nothing but cold hatred as her lips brushed mine. She smiled, then walked out the door, and I listened as her car backed out of the driveway. I gave it a few hours. She would be on the plane by then, and I wouldn't have to worry about her coming back for anything she might have forgotten. I grabbed my laptop and started going through our financials. Karen had no idea that I controlled almost every aspect of our accounts. She never paid much attention to the details. That was my job. I was the one who made sure the mortgage got paid, the bills were covered, the savings grew. And that meant I had all the power when it came to our money. I logged into our joint bank account, feeling the rush of adrenaline as I moved everything into a separate, newly created account. She wouldn't know. Not right away. She wouldn't think to check while she was out with him, and by the time she did, it would be too late. The credit cards were next. I cancelled all but one of her cards, leaving just enough to make her think she still had access. She wouldn't notice anything until she tried to make a big purchase. I felt a sense of control again, a quiet satisfaction as I dismantled her financial safety net piece by piece. Let her enjoy her little affair now. She wouldn't be smiling when she came home to find that everything she took for granted was gone. By the end of that day, I had moved out most of the money and cancelled her cards, but I wasn't done yet. I had one more step in mind. It was time to secure the house. The deed was in both of our names, but there were ways to ensure that I had the upper hand. I contacted a lawyer, made arrangements for a swift filing of divorce papers, and ensured that Karen wouldn't be able to touch the house without my consent. With everything in place, I sat back and waited. Karen called that evening, just like I knew she would, pretending everything was fine. I answered with the same routine pleasantries. "How's the conference?" I asked, my voice steady. "It's good," she replied, though I could hear the excitement in her tone. "A little boring, but you know how these things are." I smiled to myself. "Yeah, I know. You enjoy yourself." We hung up, and I went to bed with a strange sense of peace. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. The end was coming, and it would be brutal, for her. Sunday night came, and Karen walked back into the house with that same oblivious confidence. She kissed me hello, dropped her bags in the hallway, and started chatting about her conference, spinning her web of lies so effortlessly that it almost impressed me. Almost. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was calm. I knew what was coming. The next morning, as Karen headed off to work, I sent the email to my lawyer. The divorce papers would be filed by the end of the day, and Karen would be served later in the week. I almost wished I could see her face when it happened. But that wasn't part of my plan. This revenge was slow, methodical, and by the time she realized what had happened, it would be too late to do anything about it. As I watched her car disappear down the street, I felt a sense of finality. She had no idea that her entire world was about to collapse. And I wasn't going to warn her. The morning Karen was served with the divorce papers was one I had anticipated with a simmering mixture of satisfaction and dread. I had played the long game, letting her think she still held all the cards, while in reality, I had everything set up perfectly to bring her world crashing down. The paperwork had been filed, the assets moved, and the final blow was just waiting to land. That Monday started like any other. Karen went off to work without a hint of suspicion. She kissed me on the cheek, oblivious, and breezed out the door as if everything in her world was perfectly intact. But it wasn't. The cracks were about to show. The process server arrived at her office by midday, and by 1 in the afternoon, I received the message from my lawyer that the papers had been delivered. I had considered showing up myself, seeing the look on her face, but I realized that wasn't the kind of man I wanted to be, not yet. It was better this way, detached and cold, just like the betrayal she had slipped into my life. I went about my day, working from home, doing my best to focus. I thought I might feel more relief, maybe even a bit of guilt, but all I felt was a deep, hollow sense of inevitability. Karen had made her choices, and now she would have to live with the consequences. It wasn't until later that afternoon that my phone rang. I saw her name flash on the screen. I let it ring. Then it rang again, and again. Voicemail after voicemail, one right after the other. I knew she was panicking. I let her squirm for an hour before I finally listened to the first message. "Mark, what the hell is this?" Her voice was high-pitched, the usual calm, confident Karen replaced by something frantic and unhinged. "I just got served divorce papers. What the hell is going on?" I smiled as I deleted the message and moved on to the next. It was more of the same. Panic. Confusion. Anger. She must have realized by now that I wasn't answering, so her tone shifted. She tried to sound calmer, pleading. "Mark, I don't know what's going on, but can we talk? Please. This has to be a mistake." A mistake? That almost made me laugh out loud. The only mistake was hers, thinking I was blind enough, stupid enough, to not notice her affair. Thinking she could lie to me for months and get away with it. I ignored that voicemail too. The third one was the most desperate yet. "Mark, please. I don't understand. Just talk to me. We can fix this. Please don't do this without talking to me first." That one stung. For a split second, I almost wavered. Almost. But then I remembered the texts. The nights she came home late, smelling of someone else's cologne, the lies she had fed me, looking me right in the eye as if I didn't matter. As if our life didn't matter. By the time Karen came home that night, I was sitting at the kitchen table, waiting. I wanted to hear what she would say face to face. Not because I cared about her excuses, but because I wanted to see the moment she realized she had lost everything. She walked in, her face pale, her hands trembling as she dropped her keys on the counter. I looked up from the table, my expression blank, watching her like she was a stranger. And in that moment, that's exactly what she was to me. "Mark," she began, her voice shaking, "we need to talk." I nodded but didn't say a word. I wanted her to dig herself deeper, to hear her lies one last time. She sat down across from me, her eyes searching mine for some kind of reaction. "I don't understand this. The divorce papers, the accounts, you've frozen everything. Why? Why?" I asked, my voice cold. "You really want me to spell it out for you, Karen?" Her face crumbled. "Mark, I cut her off before she could launch into another rehearsed speech. "Don't bother. I already know about him." She blinked, her breath catching in her throat. What are you talking about?" "Scott," I said, watching the color drain from her face. "Virginia area code. The guy you've been sneaking around with for months." "I know about him, Karen." For a moment, she was silent, and I could almost see the gears in her mind turning, trying to come up with an explanation, a way out. But there was no way out of this. "How long?" I asked. "How long have you been lying to me?" Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked trapped, caught, like a deer in headlights. Then, finally, she managed to speak. I I didn't mean for it to happen, Mark. It just. I didn't plan it. It just happened. I stared at her, the anger rising again. You didn't plan it. You didn't mean for it to happen. Don't insult me, Karen. You made a choice. Every time you went to meet him, every time you lied to my face, you chose this. Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't care. I couldn't care. Not after everything. I never meant to hurt you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. That's the thing, Karen, I said, my voice steady and controlled. You didn't care whether you hurt me or not. You didn't think I'd find out. You thought I was too stupid or too trusting to figure it out. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks now. No, Mark, it wasn't like that. I love you. I do. It was just a mistake. I laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound. A mistake. Karen, a mistake is forgetting to pick up milk on your way home. A mistake is losing your keys. This was deliberate. You didn't just fall into his bed by accident. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing. Please, Mark, I'll do anything. Just don't leave me. We can fix this. I'll end it. I'll never see him again. Please. The sight of her begging, crying like this, should have made me feel something. Pity, anger, maybe even a twisted sense of satisfaction. But all I felt was empty. I had loved her once, maybe more than anything, but that love was gone now, replaced by nothing but cold detachment. I stood up from the table, looking down at her. It's too late for that, Karen. I've already filed for divorce. And everything? The house, the money. It's all mine. You made sure of that. She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face full of disbelief. What do you mean? I mean I've been preparing for this for a while now, I said, feeling the weight of the truth hang between us. While you were out with him, I was making sure you couldn't touch a thing. The accounts are frozen. The house is in my name. You've got nothing, Karen. She gasped, her hands shaking as she reached for me, but I stepped back, out of her reach. Mark, no. Please, don't do this. Don't take everything. I'll be better. I'll fix it. Please don't leave me with nothing. Her desperation was almost laughable. This was the same woman who thought she could cheat on me, lie to me, and still come out of this unscathed. She had no idea how far I'd go to make sure she felt the consequences of her actions. I'm done, Karen, I said, turning away. You made your choices. Now you live with them. As I walked out of the room, her sobs followed me, echoing through the house. I didn't look back. There was no point. This chapter of my life was over, and I had no intention of letting her drag me back into it. After that night, I thought it was over. I thought I'd taken control, that Karen's life would collapse like the house of cards I had carefully pulled apart. But as the days turned into weeks, I realized that revenge doesn't always give you the satisfaction you expect. It doesn't fix what's broken. It just leaves more destruction in its wake. Karen moved out within a few days of being served the divorce papers. She didn't try to fight me, not after I had frozen the accounts and taken control of everything. She packed what little she could and left with her head down, her face pale and hollow from all the crying. There were no more pleading calls or desperate texts. She knew it was over. She knew she'd lost. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt free. But the quiet that settled into the house after she was gone wasn't the peace I had imagined. It was heavy, suffocating. Every room reminded me of her. The house that I had fought to keep now felt empty, like a shell of the life we once had. I spent nights wandering from room to room, trying to avoid the memories that clung to every piece of furniture, every photo still hanging on the walls. I went through the motions of life, but it was hollow. I tried to focus on work, on my friends, but the truth was, my life had revolved around Karen for so long that I didn't know what to do without her. I had built my revenge around making her pay, but now that it was done, I was left with nothing but a deep, aching void. Weeks passed, and then months. The divorce was finalized quietly, without any more drama. Karen moved into a small apartment across town. She kept her distance, never trying to reach out or fix things between us. I heard through mutual friends that she had lost her job. Maybe it was the stress, maybe she just couldn't keep up anymore. Scott, the man she had wrecked our marriage for, had ghosted her not long after our confrontation. I suppose he wasn't as committed to her as she had thought. I wanted to believe that she deserved every bit of her downfall. But a strange feeling started to creep in, something I hadn't expected. Pity. Despite everything, despite the lies and the cheating, I started to feel sorry for her. I remembered the woman I had loved, the woman who had once been full of life and laughter. That woman was gone now, and in her place was someone broken, someone I had helped break. One night, about 6 months after she left, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was just another telemarketer. But then my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. Curious, I played it back. It was Karen. Mark, her voice was fragile, barely above a whisper, "I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm calling. I don't know what to do anymore." I froze, the sound of her voice pulling me back to those final days before everything fell apart. There was a hollow quality to her words, like she was speaking from somewhere far away. She sounded lost, defeated. I almost hung up, but something in her voice kept me listening. I need to talk to you," she continued. Please call me back. I know I don't deserve it, but I don't have anyone else." The message ended, and I stared at my phone, my hand trembling slightly. For a long time, I just stood there, unsure of what to do. The rational part of me screamed to let it go, to leave her to deal with the mess she had made of her life. But something deeper, something more human, tugged at me. I couldn't ignore the pain in her voice. Against my better judgment, I dialed her number. She answered after the second ring, her voice shaky. "Mark?" "Yeah, it's me," I said, unsure of what to say next. "What's going on?" There was a long pause, and then she spoke, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how to do this anymore. Everything's falling apart. I've lost my job, my apartment. I don't know where to go." I closed my eyes, leaning against the counter, the weight of her words pressing down on me. This wasn't the woman who had confidently walked out on me, who had cheated and lied. This was someone broken beyond repair, and despite everything, a part of me still cared. "Where are you?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. "I'm at the park," she said. "By the lake." I didn't know where else to go. Without another word, I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. When I arrived at the park, I found her sitting on a bench, staring out at the water. She looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders slumped, her face pale and gaunt. She barely looked up when I approached, her hands trembling in her lap. I sat down beside her, the silence between us heavy. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I didn't know what to say, and she seemed too fragile to start. Eventually, she broke the silence. "I didn't think it would end like this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. I thought I could fix it, that maybe we could get past it." I stared at the water, feeling a strange mix of anger and sadness. "You made your choices, Karen." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I know I did. And I was wrong. I've been wrong about so much." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. "I can't do this anymore, Mark," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to keep going. Something about the way she said it, the finality in her tone, sent a shiver down my spine. I turned to look at her, really look at her, and what I saw terrified me. She wasn't just sad. She wasn't just broken. She was gone. Hollow. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I realized that maybe my revenge had gone too far. "Karen," I said, my voice urgent now, "we can get you help. I can help you." She shook her head, her tears falling freely now. "I don't deserve your help. I don't deserve anything." I reached out, placing my hand on hers. "Karen, please. Let's get out of here. We can talk, figure things out. You don't have to do this alone." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a deep, aching sorrow. "It's too late, Mark. I've already lost everything." And then, before I could say anything else, she stood up and walked toward the water. I jumped up, reaching out to stop her, but she was already at the edge of the lake, her feet slipping into the shallow water. "Karen!" I shouted, panic rising in my chest as I ran toward her. But it was too late. She stepped into the lake, the cold water swallowing her legs as she moved deeper. I waded in after her, but by the time I reached her, she was sinking into the water, her body trembling as the cold enveloped her. I pulled her back to shore, my heart racing, my mind spinning. She was weak, her body limp in my arms, but she was still alive. Barely. I called for an ambulance, my hands shaking as I held her close, trying to keep her warm, trying to keep her here. But in the end, I couldn't save her. She slipped away quietly, her last breath leaving her as the sirens wailed in the distance. As I sat there, holding her lifeless body, I realized that my revenge had cost me more than I could have ever imagined. It hadn't just destroyed her, it had destroyed me too. And now, I was left with nothing.